Day. That's the day that Germany surrendered and signed and everything was over. So has nothing to do with Bible. Brother Jeremy Clunch, would you lead us in a prayer, please?
Yes, sir. To take advantage of every opportunity to spread the gospel. There are so many who are looking, and we need to be about your business. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
How many of you have heard the phrase, you can't teach an old dog new tricks? Everybody? I apparently am an old dog. I have tried now for 6 months to teach class using the New King James Bible, and I just cannot get comfortable with it. Andrew and I have been reading that in our nightly readings for 10, 12, 15, I can't remember how long we've been using it, but when it comes time for me to teach, I had to go back to the King James, so I'm an old dog. Chapter 18 of 1 Samuel. Chapter 18 of 1 Samuel. This is supposed to be our week of review, but since we had the gospel meeting last week and John spoke, we're going to go back and cover what we didn't cover last week, and there will probably be some time then for us to go back and do some review also. Chapter 18 of 1 Samuel. Now, this is sort of a follow-up to the end of chapter 17, because the last verse of verse 17 says, Saul said to him, Whose son art thou, thou young man? And David answered, I am the son of thy servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. And he had just gone and killed David, and now they're getting down to this point. Now there's a lot of confusion among some people when it comes to this, because for a few chapters here, it looks like Saul knew who David was, and then a few verses later, he doesn't know who David is, and then he knows who he is, and then he don't know who he is. So to make it simple and without going back and lacing all the verses together, we just have to remember that when they're on a story, they tell that story down to this line, and then they might back up and pick up and tell this story down to this line. And we all have a tendency to do the same things. If we're talking about a particular subject, we carry that subject from point A all the way down through point Z, if there's that many. And then if we change subjects, well, that might take us back a few years, and now we have to back up and start over. So let's not get excited about Saul appearing not to know David or knowing David. But right after he had killed Goliath and come down through this in chapter 17, verse 18 starts out, And it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Again, there are some in the fringe world out there that want to make a big deal out of how close these two were together, and make some untoward comments even about it at times. But what does it really mean there when Jonathan's soul was knit to the soul of David?
I think they viewed each other as brothers.
Okay. You can look at it also as they were bound together by their friendship or their love for one another. If you go back to Genesis chapter 44, and verse 30, 44 and verse 30. Now therefore, when I come to thy servant my father, and the lad be not with us, seeing that his life is bound up in the lad's life. If you recall the story, this is where the brothers are down in Egypt getting food, and they're talking to Joseph, but they don't know it's Joseph yet, and they're wanting to send him back without the lad. And he says, if we go back without the lad, our father's going to die, because his soul is bound up with his soul. And if you recall, a few weeks ago, we also discussed that there was a definite age difference between Jonathan and David. And just as a reminder, we'll go back to chapter 13 and verse 1. Where it said, Saul reigned a year, and when he had reigned 2 years over Israel, Saul chose him 3,000 men of Israel, whereof 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash and in Mount Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah. So Jonathan was old enough here that he could be in charge of an army, and David, taking over the reign when he was 30 years old, was born in the 10th year of Saul's reign, so that would have made them, Jonathan, old enough to be David's father. So to me, when we get to it was knit together, they were just very, very close. It was like a father-son relationship. They were that close together. Questions, comments? Right.
For us to be friends.
Right.
Really, it includes a great deal of sacrifice one for another. And that's the thing that we're supposed to do as brothers and sisters in Christ. And if you say you have a friend, you have to sacrifice greatly. When that person needs you, will you be there, or you just talk? I'll be there and never really show up. And that's not real friendship. Knit together or intertwined, if you will, together. And as friendship goes, we need to be intertwined. We really need to look out for one another and sacrifice for one another in the true sense of the word.
I'm glad you brought that up, because if you really think about it, Christians, their friendship, you hear people in the world today all the time say, well, I trust that person with my life. Brother Kelvin, do you trust me with your life? Or do you trust your life to me? Well, I'm going to go you one better. I trust my soul to your care. So when Christians have that bond and looking out for each other, they're trying to look out for each other's soul, not their physical well-being. So it's just one of my warped ways of looking at things. So, question, comments? Verse 2 then says, and Saul took him that day and would not let him go, would let him go no more to his father's house. So apparently David had been with his brothers at war, had been coming and going and being around. Saul just didn't know who he was at the time, but now that he finds out and now he knows what he did, he's going to keep him around close to him. If we go back to 1 Samuel 17 and 15, it sort of fills in a gap. 1 Samuel 17 and verse 15. But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. So before he was making some trips, and now he's going to be there. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. What does it mean to make a covenant? I know some of you are not quite as old as I am, but it was a thing for us as young folks when I was in single-digit age and barely double-digit age. We had been reading and hearing all about the Indians and how they did things, and it was not uncommon for us young folks to become blood brothers. I mean, that's how close we wanted to be. We were wanting to be. So here they're just getting that close, and to be a blood brother to somebody meant that you wasn't kin to them naturally, but you now considered them your family. Verse 4, Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him and gave it to David and his garments, even to his sword and to his bow and to his girdle. Anything strange about that? It used to be not uncommon for people that were very close to each other. Now I'm in my teenage years, but a person that I hunted with and fished with all the time, we traded knives. Not because his knife was any better than mine or mine any better than his, but again, we were forming that bond that I've got part of you now, you got part of me now. So, and again, back in the time that we're talking about here, this particular era, they gave clothes and things of that nature. Just as a matter of fact, when they went to somebody's house, if you went visiting somebody back in those days, when they brought you in as their house guest, what were you considered?
Family.
How close a family? You would protect that person with your life. And you see the examples of that. Yes, sir.
I'm not sure societies, David would have been fighting in the colors of the house and with the royal crest on his armor that came from Jonathan as the son of the king.
Find 3 different sections in this one verse. Behaved himself wisely. What does that mean?
Well, he had to act in a way to give confidence to his men, I guess.
With honor, with respect to the men and all. And he was accepted in the sight of all the people. How is he going to be accepted in the sight of all the people if he does not do the honorable thing and be respectful to all? And also in the sight of Saul's servants. So apparently even Saul's servants saw more in David than they saw in Saul. Yes, sir, Brother Clunch.
Saul's already seen the handwriting on the wall. He's going to be removed, but yet David is still respectful of his position.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
I hadn't really thought about it until this morning. We always talk about how David was respectful of Saul because of his position and the fact that the Lord anointed him, which I think is abundantly clear in Scripture. But thinking about it now is also because he's Jonathan's father. You know, it adds a whole different level of, I want to be real careful how I handle this too. It's something I've never thought of.
You're right, but also as we go on further into the study, it's not in today's lesson, but What does David say when about somebody killing Saul later on? Won't do it because he is, huh? He's the Lord's anointed. So I agree with you that the bond between Jonathan and David was such that you wouldn't want to hurt the father of somebody like that. But to me, it all comes down to what we just said here, that
Absolutely, that was what he put the most weight on, and that's what he always said.
yeah,
But this is just another layer to it that I hadn't thought about.
yeah, just a little side street on that one. So David is gaining support from all the people, even Saul's people. And it came to pass as they came, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women came out of all cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tabrets, with joy, and with instruments of music. And the women answered one another as they played, and said, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Does that literally mean that Saul had gone out and killed 1,000 Philistines, and David had gone out and personally killed 10,000?
The armies had done that.
The armies had done that, and Saul had led that army to face that many thousands, and David had faced tens of thousands. So, but now it gets very interesting. Verse 8. Saul was very wroth, and the saying displeased him. And he said, They have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed that but thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom? Before we discuss that, go back a couple of chapters to chapter 15 and verse 28. Samuel said unto him, The Lord hath rent the kingdom of Israel from thee this day, and hath given it to a neighbor of thine that is better than thou. As Brother Clonch had mentioned a verse before, or a few verses before, Saul already knew exactly what was going to take place, that the prophet had already told him that he was going to lose the kingdom and that somebody else was going to take over the kingdom. Sister Ma.
Does Saul know at this time, or even ever know, that David is actually going to be the person who takes over the kingdom?
Well,
There's a difference in knowing, I know somebody's going to do my job, and I know exactly who it is.
yeah, my personal belief on the way this works is I don't think there's enough evidence one way or the other to know for sure, but I am on the line that you're on, that I'm not sure that he's aware that it's David at this point. Could be wrong on that, but the only thing is that I think at least he's got a suspicion, because what has David been doing all the time he's been sending him out to battle? He's been winning. What has he been doing with all the people in Saul's kingdom? Gaining favor. What has he been doing with Saul's closest allies? Been gaining favor. So when he says there that he was very wroth and displeased, he already knew the kingdom was going to go away from him. And now with David doing all of this, he's saying, well, if they're singing this, he's going to have my kingdom too. Yes, sir.
I think he was jealous because David was more popular with everyone than Saul was.
He was, he is, insecure. He's suspicious, and he's jealous, not only of David because David is more popular, but I think he's jealous because he's lost favor with God also, and God's already told him what the bad news is. Anything else? Yes, sir.
I think you're right. I think he already knows his time is done, and so he's suspicious of anybody who seems to be in God's favor, which is so baffling. But don't we do that occasionally ourselves sometimes, in one way or another?
Yes, sir. In one way or another. Let me read the next verse, and then we'll come back to what you're saying there. What more can he have but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day and forward. And this is where I said from that day forward, eyeing him mean that he was suspicious of David. And, sometimes people have a reason to be suspicious of somebody. But at other times, they have no justification for being suspicious of somebody. And up to this point, has David given him any indication that he should be suspicious of his motives or of his end goal? So why is he suspicious of David at this point? He's already been told he's going to lose the kingdom. He already sees that he's less popular than David, even though David has not given him a specific reason. He's, in his own mind, he's trying to rationalize or justify all of this. And it came to pass on the morrow that the evil spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied in the midst of the house, and David played with his hands as at other times, and there was a javelin in Saul's hand. Before we get to the javelin, let's go back to the evil spirit from God came upon Saul. Again, if we'll go back to chapter 16 and fill in a blank. In chapter 16, verse 14, but the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. So all of this is just coming to a head at this point. Saul had known that once his kingdom was gone, the Lord had departed, brought on the evil intentions. And now when it says that he had a javelin in Saul's hand, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but we need to look at some differences here. What is the difference between a spear and a javelin? Javelin, it was also, they took the time to make sure it was balanced so that when they threw it, they could hit what they was aiming at with. Also, a javelin or a short spear that could be thrown was also during this period of time a symbol of power, a symbol of strength. Kings would carry them around. So it is when you're reading your translations there, whichever one you have, if it says spear, it's not an 8-foot spear that Saul has in his hand, too unwieldy. It is a sign of power. It's at least a short spear or a javelin showing his authority and his power. And now that's what he has in his hand. Comments? Saul cast the javelin, for he said, I will smite David even to the wall with it. And David avoided out of his presence twice. So apparently it wasn't a one-time occurrence. Saul was out to get him, threw the javelin at him. And verse 12 says, and Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him and was departed from Saul. I think as a sure point at this point to answer your question, by this time, I'm almost certain that Saul knew it was David that was going to take his place, because this comment right here says that now Saul knew that the Lord had departed him and that the Lord was with David. Anything else?
I think with God departing from Saul, then his natural character came to be. It said God cast an evil spirit on him. I think Saul had it in his mind to do it anyway. So I say God help him out. That's what I would.
Well, this has always been a discussion along the way on many of the topics when it says God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Did God take a good guy and say, you're not going to be good anymore, you're going to be bad, and make him bad? God just used what was already there, and I think that we see that as we go all along here. God knew what was in his heart, maybe before he did, but God is just putting into place those elements. Next verse. Therefore Saul removed him from him and made him his captain over 1,000, and he went out and came in before the people. Well, if Saul can't kill him and get rid of him, what's the next best option? Send him into battle. Maybe somebody else can kill him, get rid of him. So he would send him out to do all these things.
I believe the term is, I mean to put you in harm's way.
I mean to put you in harm's way.
But even that is ironic. When you see where Saul first meets David, he can't get much more harm's way than Goliath for a small child.
That's true.
It didn't work there because God was not working anywhere else.
But what do people in Saul's position, and we're getting into the mental aspect of them now, how many people in his situation think rationally? None of them. So he is being irrational when he says, well, I'll just get him out of my sight and send him off and send him into all these battles, and surely something will happen to him.
I think David remembered that too, because he used it later on when he was more effective, because he said just withdraw from him and leave him out there by himself. I think he learned from this that it didn't work the way Saul was trying to do it.
Well, but did he learn anything from Saul? What did he do to Uriah? Sent him out to be killed.
I'll make a reverse argument. I think he did learn from Saul. He repented where Saul did not.
Well, that's true also. That's true also.
We see both sides of it. And I know we're going a little further down the road with David than we're probably supposed to today. But he made plenty of his own mistakes. But unlike Saul, he tried to pass it off to everybody else. Even though it took David a while to figure it out, he owned up to what he had done. And the difference is very evident between the two of them.
Yeah, and here's another comparison that you can draw that just came to mind. Saul was confronted by Samuel the prophet, and Samuel did not hold back. He told him exactly how our old country phrase, how the cow ate the cabbage, right? And what did he do? Saul was Saul. Seems to me that somebody confronted David in the same way and told him exactly and said, you are the man. And then, as Brother Jeremy pointed out, David repented. Two opposite actions off of both being directly confronted. 14, David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. I really like this verse because, again, it points out that David was wise in the way he did things. He was honorable, he was respected, he did it the right way. And the reward was that God was with him. If he had been like Saul and not behaved wisely, would God have still been with him? Verse 15, wherefore when Saul saw that he behaved himself very wisely, he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he went out and came in before them. Apparently there was no change in the way David conducted himself. He was still just the same person from day to day. Didn't take his position. You know, a lot of people, when they get promoted to positions like this, well, what do you notice them doing? They change. A lot of them go on what I refer to as a power trip. They're now in a position of authority. They're now going to let you know who's boss instead of just being same old person that's now in a different position with more responsibility. I think one of the best instructors I ever had in the Air Force at one of the schools was addressing a similar situation to this. And he said, the people make you who you are. He said, if they do good, you reward them in public. If they mess up, you counsel them in private. You always give the worker the credit for doing good and all the accolades you get because it's the people that got them for you, but you take all the blame. Never let the blame roll downhill. And I think as Christians, that's what we need to set our mind to do also. And if we want to go on a side trip, every politician out there in the United States today always does what? Not me. So, give credit to your workers, take the blame for the mistakes. Questions, comments? Yes, sir.
Like they said of scripture, because it puts me in mind to understand that our young people need this. It's going into the working world. Just about every Christian that goes from high school to working and laboring, trying to do the right thing, may experience this whole jealousy situation. It's dependent on you how it turns out, because it turned out good for David, even though he had to suffer through some things.
Yep.
And it would turn out good for you. It reminds me back of Cain and Abel. And God asked Cain, why was he wrong? If you had not done the right thing, would you not have been accepted? Our being accepted is not from man, and we have to always remember that. It's from God. David knew that. And when we're out there in the working world trying to do the right thing, then we face this jealousy situation because people don't know God. They think they're threatened by you for no reason at all, just for doing the right thing, and they don't understand what that is. I'm jealous of you, you're threatening me, you're threatening my job, people are talking about you more than they're talking about me. So you're trying to
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And if the young folks don't have the proper background, it's going to be a problem. When it comes to jealousy, my wife has had for many years the correct philosophy on it. Happened to get to go fishing with Brother Donnie last Friday. I really like his boat. I'd love to have his boat, but I want him to have a better one. That's her philosophy. I want this, but I want you to have a better one. It's not that I want it because I can be better than you, but I want that, and you can do something better. So along the same lines, if we're always, as Christians, what does the word emulate mean? Sorry?
Be like.
We're trying to be like people, and what does edify mean? To build up. So if I want to emulate you and edify you, what am I doing? Just what Andrea said. I'm trying to be like you, but I'm trying to build you up more. And anything else?
It's almost like God knew what he was talking about. Because as we emulate,
Christians when they should be trying to in Christ.
the Bible deals with that too.
Yeah. So if we were to focus and try to be more like Christ, we wouldn't be worrying about trying to compete with our neighbor, right? We got about 5 minutes or 4 minutes to get through the last section of today's lesson, which is chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. Saul spoke to Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David. He's sending them out to fight, and that's not working. He's chunked spears at him or javelins, and that hadn't worked. So now he's putting everybody on notice that they need to kill him. And then Jonathan goes to Saul and said, Saul, or went to David and said, Saul, my father seeketh to kill thee. Now therefore I pray thee, take heed to thyself until the morning, and abide in a secret place, and hide thyself. So Jonathan is protecting David at this point, and he even goes out to talk to his father about it. And in verse 4, Jonathan spoke good of David unto Saul his father, and said unto him, let innocent blood to slay David without cause. Jonathan is making a very good plea to his dad here. And Saul, at this point at least, came back to, I think Saul was not necessarily, he had the, can't think of the word I'm looking for. He wasn't schizophrenic, but he exhibited characteristics of being schizophrenic, because he goes from one end of the scale to the other end of the scale. And so here Jonathan got his attention, and he brought David back to Saul in his presence, and everything was as it had been. Everything was on the peaceful side. And then we go down to find out that David fought more Philistines, slew them with a great slaughter. But then that evil spirit came upon Saul again, sat in his house with his javelin in his hand, and David played with his hand. And Saul sought to smite David even to the wall with the javelin. But again he slipped away out of Saul's presence, and he smote the javelin into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. So I think as we go on along, we didn't have time to go back and do review, but as we continue this saga with Saul and David, you will find at times Saul is okay with David, but then that evil spirit gets in his mind, his suspicions get to him, his nature gets to him, and he's got to get David killed again. Questions, comments so far? Yes, sir.
Why did it take Jonathan to remind Saul what David is doing?
I'm sorry?
Why did it take Jonathan, Saul's son, to remind him what David has done for him?
Why did Jonathan have to remind Saul that David was actually a good guy?
Oh, okay. I was having trouble assimilating it. Why did Jonathan have to tell Saul or remind Saul that David was a good guy? I think because of what we had just said, that when certain things get in your mind, if you're suspicious of somebody, everything you say or everything you see them do, they're doing it for a nefarious reason, or they're doing it for this reason or that reason, when there's nothing to it. And Saul he was in one of his, let's go kindly, he was in one of his breaks from reality. And Saul had to talk to him and remind him of David's true nature. Thank y'all so much.